Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 19th episode of Let's Talk UNRWA, entitled UNRWA HQ Update. I am Layla Mukhaber, UNRWA USA's Director of Communications and your host for this hour. It's a great pleasure to be with you and to have with us Leni Stenseth. A short refresher of our program. Let's Talk UNRWA is a monthly speaker series live streamed on UNRWA USA's Facebook and YouTube channels, and meant to provide all of you with an insider view of UNRWA, the agency, and its work. It's a unique opportunity for you to hear directly from UNRWA headquarters staff and UNRWA field staff, who are mostly refugees themselves. Today, we have a very special guest with us here in DC, visiting from the Middle East, and that is UNRWA's Deputy Commissioner General, Leni Stenseth. Leni was appointed in June 2020 by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres as the Deputy Commissioner General of UNRWA. As a career diplomat, she has served as the Norwegian ambassador to Lebanon and brings to the position nearly 20 years of experience in international politics, humanitarian action, crisis management, 15 of which were in leadership positions with the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Norwegian Red Cross. Leni holds a bachelor's degree in law and political science and a master's degree in international relations from the University of Oslo in Norway. Today, Leni will be giving our audiences a general update about UNRWA's latest conditions and a broad overview of the regional developments with the agency. Without further ado, Leni, it's so great having you here with us today, and thank you for all the work you're doing for Palestine refugees. Let's start with our discussion.
Thank you so much for having me and for giving me this opportunity to engage with you and all the listeners, because it is an opportunity being in the US to also be able to engage with those who are interested in learning more about the agency and the work that we do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again. So, Leni, you joined UNRWA's leadership in September 2020, and just a few months into a global pandemic. In May, the people of Gaza endured yet another large-scale Israeli military assault and ongoing forced evictions of refugees in Sheikh Jarrah and other parts of the West Bank. UNRWA is on the ground serving refugees in all of these areas. So, can you tell us how these last 2 years impacted the agency's operations and the refugees it serves, and perhaps how this experience changed your own personal perspective or overall outlook?
Thank you. I joined the agency, as you said, in the fall of 2020, in the middle of a pandemic. And I joined the agency because I strongly believe in the mandate. I strongly believe in the need to ensure that Palestinian refugees can access quality services until a just solution is found to the conflict. And when joining the agency in the middle of a crisis, the first reflection I had was that I was deeply impressed by the resilience of the staff working for the agency, almost 30,000 staff in our 5 fields, Syria, Lebanon, West Bank, Gaza, and Jordan, their ability to continue to deliver services to the Palestinian refugees despite all the challenges caused by the pandemic. Now, our staff are Palestinian refugees themselves. They're in the community, delivering services to the community, also themselves feeling the hardship of the pandemic, but continuing to be in the front line, meeting with nurses that, were responsible for feeding their own family during the pandemic, where many were facing increased economic hardship, where they had the fear of, bringing on the infection to their family. They continued to show up at work, in the beginning with the shortage of protective equipment, but with the ambition, with the dedication to make sure that services were continuing despite the pandemic. So I would say that that was my first reflection, was that what I've heard about the agency, the strength of the agency, their staff, was really true. There was a strong dedication, a really, I would say, amazing dedication to continue to be there in the local community for the Palestinian refugees. The second reflection that I had was, of course, the financial hardship of the organization. And many have heard about how the agency is struggling to be able to continue to deliver services where we're in a situation where the needs are increasing, the costs are increasing, but the income is not increasing at the same level. So that's certainly something that is a continuous struggle. But despite the fact that this is an enormous challenge on the ground, we are able to deliver life-saving services to millions of Palestine refugees every day across our fields. So on a personal level, for me, it's been really rewarding to work for an agency with such dedicated staff, with such an important mandate. And I'm really proud to work for UNRWA every day because of that.
Thank you so much, Leni, for that reflection. I also feel immense pride in the work that we do and in supporting the work of the agency. And so we hope that we can continue to provide that with the support of our listeners, our viewers today. And I hope they'll be inspired by your reflections and hearing directly from UNRWA's headquarters about the situation on the ground. I wanted to ask, so UNRWA operates across 5 fields, like you mentioned, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. It's a very large operation serving 5.8 million Palestine refugees. I think you told me in our earlier briefing today that 3 million of which access those services. Can you tell us what are the top challenges UNRWA is facing right now when delivering its programs on the ground?
Yes, maybe I could talk a little bit about the situation on the ground in our 5 fields, to describe the challenges that the Palestinian refugees are facing in their everyday life. In Syria, we have approximately 400,000 Palestinian refugees. Half of them have been displaced again because of the conflict in Syria. Many have also left the country, but those who are still there are heavily impacted by the financial crisis in the country. That is an implication of also the challenges that we see in Lebanon that has a replicating effect on Syria. So, having been displaced again, many now, families have been split. We see many female-led households with women responsible for feeding, their kids alone, without any other opportunities than to rely on the support they receive from the agency. The hardship in Syria is very difficult to describe. I've been there many times myself over the last few years, and I think one of the best examples maybe to explain the situation on the ground in Syria could be to talk about Yarmouk camp, which before the conflict was the biggest Palestinian camp in the region, with more than 160,000 Palestinian refugees living in the camp. And now, after the conflict, we see some of the refugees returning to the camp, a camp that has been totally destroyed during the conflict. Today, thousands of Palestinian children are living in the camp without access to electricity, without access to healthcare, without access to education. And this is a desperate situation, but they're still coming back to the camp in increasing numbers because they cannot any longer sustain living expenses outside the camp. So the situation in Syria is extremely difficult. Moving to Lebanon, I think it's part of the same situation there as well. We see that in the camps in Lebanon, the situation is getting increasingly desperate because the Palestinian refugees residing in Lebanon and the Syrian Palestinian refugees who fled Syria and also living in the camps are heavily impacted by the economic, social, and financial crisis in Lebanon. The number of Palestinian refugees living beyond the poverty line is dramatically increasing month by month. We're now talking about figures around 75% of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon below the poverty line. And In Lebanon, the Palestine refugees have no access to the formal labor market, so they have been very much dependent on the informal labor market. And with the financial crisis, their opportunities to secure an income has been drastically reduced. So the need for cash support to survive in Lebanon has increased over the last few years, and we're struggling to meet the needs of the Palestine refugees in Lebanon. Moving to the West Bank, the poverty rates are less, but the protection needs are huge. Those of us following the news now can see that there has been a huge increase in the tension in the West Bank, particularly in Jerusalem, and the number of Palestine refugees who have been killed due to confrontation with the Israeli security forces are much higher this year than previous years. Already in 2022, 16 Palestine refugees have been killed, and the number of injuries are bigger than in many years due to incursion into the camp by Israeli defense forces. So the protection needs are huge in the West Bank. Moving to Gaza, the agency is serving more than 1 million refugees, providing food and cash support, education to 240,000 kids. Gaza being a place where people have been living under a blockade for more than 15 years, the economic hardship is immense. The unemployment rates among the Palestine refugees is reaching 50%, even up to 80% among the young. So it's really a situation whereby without the agency, the Palestine refugees living in Gaza would not be able to secure their livelihood from day to day. In Jordan is the only field where we don't have an acute humanitarian crisis. Many of the Palestine refugees have been able to move out of poverty because they were given the full rights as citizens in Jordan. And we're now serving the most vulnerable among the Palestine refugees living in Jordan, around 400,000. Most of them are Palestine refugees who came later and were not given the full access to citizenship. So they're kind of trapped into poverty in Jordan and are in acute need of cash support. So that was a tour of the region. And when you asked Leila about the top challenges, I would say is to meet all these needs, because the needs are increasing and the costs are increasing as well as an impact of rising prices on medicine and food in the world today, and fuel. When visiting the Palestine refugee camps and meeting with the refugees, it's always heartbreaking to see, how much support they need and how difficult it is for us to meet those needs. But what is comforting is to know that every day we're providing education to more than 500,000 kids, and we're providing food to more than 1 million people. And more than 2 million people are accessing our health centers every year. So, without the agency, there would be no access to those services for the Palestine refugees. So I think it's important for us also to tell that story, how much we mean every day for millions of Palestine refugees, and how important it is to continue to support the agency to enable the Palestine refugees to have access to education, to provide them with a hope for the future, and to enable them to be able to step up once there is a solution to the conflict, so they can create their own society, building on the capacity and the empowerment that the agency has been able to provide them with through our services.
Thank you so much, Leni, for that overview. It's so important, especially for those here in the United States who have not had the chance to visit and to see the camps and the incredible services that UNRWA has provided. I have had the rare privilege of doing that many times, including to Gaza, and I really echo your call for being able to tell the stories of UNRWA. And so I do welcome any of our viewers here who have benefited from UNRWA services in their lives, whether it be through employment or through education or other services like food, that you come to us and tell us about that experience. We have a blog called the Voices of UNRWA blog, where we aim to highlight and center the voices of Palestine refugees. So do tell us, and please connect us with other folks who you are aware of, so that we can, highlight and elevate those important narratives. So Leni, you mentioned there being a food crisis in Gaza, and the number of refugees in Gaza requiring food assistance from UNRWA, as far as I understand, has increased from just 80,000 people in the year 2000 to a staggering 1.2 million individuals in 2022, which is obviously telling of the economic situation there. That's why our focus this month at UNRWA USA and every Ramadan has always been about providing as many refugee families as possible with food assistance. I haven't been to Gaza since the pandemic, but visiting the UNRWA food distribution centers is an important part of every visit and trip I make to Gaza. The lines of people waiting to collect their families' food baskets are a clear indicator of the immense need and the importance of this UNRWA intervention. I've heard, in fact, recently that many mothers and fathers have had to make the choice to skip meals in order to feed their children. So could you tell us about food insecurity in a little bit more detail and what that looks like in Gaza and how UNRWA is tackling this?
Thank you for that question, because that gives me an opportunity to talk about the importance of our food distribution operation in Gaza. It's more than 75% are food insecure in Gaza. That's a number that's very high. And I think sometimes, it's important to go behind those numbers and to see the families and their struggle. When I was in Gaza a couple of weeks ago, I visited Jabaila camp. I visited the home of a father of 10 children who was unemployed. And I asked him, what UNRWA meant to him. And he told me that through UNRWA, he was able to provide food to his children every day. He was able to send them to school, and he was able to meet their needs when they were sick. He could take them to a health center. And through that, he said to me, we were able as an agency to provide dignity to him as a father. Because without UNRWA, without the opportunity he had to collect the food basket, he said he would not have been able to provide to the kids what they needed, because he was a Palestine refugee, because he was in the situation he was in the camp. I think his story is the story for so many in Gaza, that the agency is the lifeline for them on so many fronts. So it's not only the food, but it's also housing. It's also the feeling of having a safety net, somewhere to go to if they feel that they need support. I think adding to the provision of food and education and health, with the help of many of our donors and supporters, including US UNRWA, we're able to provide psychosocial and support to those who are facing mental challenges as a consequence of the hardship they're living through, particularly related to the armed conflict that unfortunately seems to be a recurrent situation that they have to live through in Gaza, the latest conflict in May 2021. I think you really have to sometimes, talk to people, to hear their stories, to understand how severely impacted they are by the level of violence that they have to live through, and the level of insecurity as well, the fear of another conflict looming. I think, just living in Gaza, it's a very small area, and experience that every day there is, a heavy shelling, bombing taking place, the fear of being killed, of that the missiles will hit someone that you love. I think it's very difficult to explain how that can be felt. And being there, talking to the mothers who told me about how they were trying to protect their children from reality, but how impossible that was, because they were hearing the sound of the airplanes, they were seeing the missiles falling. And they said that their kids couldn't sleep anymore, they couldn't eat anymore, they were just so afraid. I think that's an important issue to factor in our response. So with the support of you and others, we have been able to scale up the support to children through offering what we call summer fun activities. We would have called it a summer camp, but that has a different association in that region. So we call it summer fun activities, where we provide an opportunity for kids to come together and express their feelings about what they've been through. And through that, we try to some extent, enable them to continue to access education, to live their lives, and to manage the insecurity that they have to live through. So I think for Gaza, at least, the food, the education, the social protection, the mental and psychosocial support that we can offer is so crucial. There is a concern now that with the Ukraine crisis, we will not be able to provide food towards the end of 2022. We're doing now the procurement of food for what we call the third quarter, which is from midsummer until October. And the prices have gone up dramatically, to the extent that with the current budget, we don't think we will be able to secure the funding for the food in November and December this year. So this is, of course, something that we need to work on together with our partners to see if we can do additional fundraising to enable us to continue the food operation. I think it's, in addition to, of course, the humanitarian aspect of this, being able to feed, for the parents to be able to feed their children, I think also it's about the stability in Gaza, because if people are hungry, there is nothing that will prevent them from taking to the streets, and this will only risk increased level of violence and confrontation. So I think the stability aspect of providing food is something that we need to emphasize as well.
Thank you for that, Leni, and it helps to have that full picture of the situation facing Palestine refugees in Gaza. In particular, it is an area where many of our supporters have immense concern, and they come to us wanting to do more. And we're really so grateful for those who are already sold on supporting these programs, from food to mental health care, and we hope that you'll continue that support. I saw recently in a group that I'm on in Facebook, a woman reflecting on what the UNRWA food basket meant to her growing up in Gaza, and the way she would use the various products to add some comfort to her life, taking the powdered milk and adding, warming it and adding sugar. And it was such a comforting drink for her now that, many years later, she's found herself living in the United States. She continues to make that same drink to kind of soothe her and make her feel connected both to her childhood and her upbringing and her Palestinian roots. I found that to be so touching, and I'm sure many other people have these stories of how these services helped them not just survive, but enhanced their life. So I want to again remind our audience, if you're listening to what Leni's been sharing about this situation, that UNRWA USA's Ramadan campaign this year is focused on providing this food assistance to refugee families in Gaza living under the poverty line, which Leni said is over 50% of the population and nearly 80% of the young people living there. And simply put, people don't have the economic or physical access to food, but UNRWA is able to do this with your financial support. So for as little as $50, you could be providing food to a family for an entire month. That donation link is in our comments now. I'm going to ask our colleagues to drop it there, and it's also scrolling at the bottom of our screen. So please, if you have interest in supporting this, go to unrwausa.org and help us provide food and help UNRWA meet those needs for 2022 so that families won't have to go without it. I wanted to touch a little bit more on that issue of mental health, which you talked about in the Summer Fun Weeks, which is such a fantastic program. Our signature annual Gaza 5K, which is a very popular event here in the United States, is dedicated to exactly that, providing mental health support in Gaza. It was held in New York City just last month for the first time after 2 years of going virtual. This is an event that we've put on for more than a decade. We went virtual during COVID in order to safely allow people to gather all around the world. But I wanted to give a huge shout out to our New York, New Jersey, and tri-state area for coming together and making it a huge success, raising over $325,000. And I'll actually be in the Bay Area next week with my colleagues to be able to prepare for our return to that community for a fall Gaza 5K. So mark October 8 on your calendars and stay tuned for updates about that. If you're able to, Leni, could you tell us more about the mental health crisis faced by Palestine refugees, not just in Gaza, but more broadly across the fields? If you've met with any of the counselors, I've had the chance to do so, and I'm sure you have more kind of recent interaction. And let us know maybe how the various crises differ in each area of operation from the mental health perspective.
Yeah, certainly. I think, in humanitarian action globally, there tends to be a strong focus on, the physical needs. You need food, you need water. Adding to that, also education to provide, a prospect for a future. But in all this, I think what, up till now has been less focused on is the mental health part. And I'm so happy that we as an agency, with the support of our partners, are able to scale up our mental health support to the Palestinian refugees living through hardship in all our 5 fields. I think that's a huge investment for the future. And it requires us to train staff to be able to provide that support to the Palestinian refugees. And last time I visited Gaza, I met with some of our counselors who had been trained. They were graduated. There was a graduation ceremony for more than 80 social workers trained in providing mental health support, and discussing with them what they thought they could bring to those in need of counseling. They said that, because they come from the community, because they live through the same hardship, they can also identify with the challenges and better understand how they can provide the support that those accessing the services need. So it varies a lot, from, maybe adults have different needs compared to children. But in Gaza, much of it is related to they explained to me that when they're living through hardship, it sometimes also becomes very difficult to maintain good relationship within the family. So there's a lot of stress on the breadwinner in the family, on the dynamic, between the different members of the household. So some of the counselors have been trained to intervene and to make sure that they do receive the support they need to be able to develop healthy relationship. It's also about understanding how children may react to living through those difficult times, how they may react to having been exposed to what I explained earlier, armed conflict, and understand the reaction of the children and for the parents to be able to help their own children as well. So I think with that investment, at least we can try to do something. Although we cannot solve everything, we can at least try to make the relationship within the family and within a community more healthy. And we can try to prepare the children for the situation that they would have to tackle, and to also be able to deal with their own emotions in a better way. So you mentioned the summer fun weeks, and I had the chance to visit last summer after the conflict, and I saw, a classroom with kids where, all of them had just come out of, 11 days with deep fear of getting killed, of hearing the planes and the bombs falling, and then they were, asked to draw a story, to make a story together about what they've been through, and while doing that, they are laughing, they're kids, and it's a safe space for them. And you have trained counselors who are able to ask them the right questions. so they can deal with their emotions. So I think it's a week, and it brings some, I don't know, some happiness to the children. So it's a lot of focus on having fun, but doing that in a way that also enables them to tackle their emotions. So that's something that we will repeat this summer after the schools are closed, and we'll offer it to more than 100,000 kids in Gaza. So this, of course, is something we can do because we receive support from your side, from other donors as well, who really think it is important to invest in the children's mental health. In other fields, I would like to go back to Syria, where children have been living through horrible conflict for more than 11 years and being displaced again. Many have lost the breadwinner in the family due to the conflict, and are now facing another round of displacement because they cannot afford to pay the rent where they have sought refuge after the conflict. So there as well, we're reaching out to women who are sole breadwinners for the family because their husband has been killed or has disappeared during the conflict, trying to provide them also with some mental support because of the responsibility they're carrying, being alone, raising their children in such difficult circumstances. And again, in Syria, it's important to reach out to children who have experienced armed conflict and maybe seen gruesome things happening around them for years. Now that we're able to scale up that kind of support, we are reaching more and more children, and hopefully through that enabling them to deal with what they've been through. I could continue to the West Bank as well. I think the stories are much of the same. It is about focusing on the individual need for support. That is not only covering the physical needs, but also the mental needs because of the hardship they're living through. I think around all this is also a sense of being left behind as a community of Palestine refugees across all the fields, because we see that in global politics, the attention is shifting elsewhere. There is no political horizon for a solution to their plight. And all this comes together around an everyday life that is a struggle. So I think combine this is creating despair and understanding that despair and trying to provide them with the space where they can deal with that is very important.
Thank you so much, Leni. I just wanted to mention that we have at least one viewer tuned in from Beirut who gives their best regards to all the UNRWA staff. So it's good to see that we have people tuned in from all over, from Washington, D.C. to Chicago. Thank you for all of your compassion for this cause and for your commitment to our mission at UNRWA USA. I'd like to actually speak for a moment about our vision. Our newly established vision as an organization is that until there is a just solution to their plight, a world where Palestine refugees thrive. So Leni, talk to us about the stabilizing role UNRWA plays in the lives and futures of Palestine refugees, and how hope and dignity, a word you mentioned earlier in our conversation, can exist in the darkest of places.
I think the ability to send your kids to school is extremely important for parents all over the world, and it's the same in the Palestine refugee community. The fact that UNRWA provides high quality education to more than 500,000 kids, and going back to the 70-year history of the agency, we provided education to millions and millions of Palestine refugees, and through that, giving them the opportunity to move out of the poverty trap, to secure livelihood and opportunities, and to have hopes for a future beyond the desperate situation that they're facing in their daily life. So I think education, it's our flagship program. I cannot see any alternative to UNRWA providing that education. It's something that we're extremely proud of, and we see that from other external evaluations, such as the World Bank and the British Council, who are awarding us prizes every year because we are a cost-efficient, high-quality educational provider. Or children in our schools, and I say or, but of course it's due to the to teachers' efforts, are able to ensure that our kids excel with 1 year compared to the host country school system because of the quality of the education. And we do that cheaper than the host countries. So I think we're both cost efficient and high quality. And that's something that I know the teachers working for UNRWA are very proud of. And the parents sending their kids to UNRWA schools are also very proud of being able to provide that type of education to their kids. So I think that's something that we need to preserve at any cost, because without education, there is no hope for a better future.
Thank you so much, Leni. And you mentioned that UNRWA has a very large staff. It's generating livelihoods for so many people, most of whom are refugees themselves, and these teachers. I think every teacher I've ever met at an UNRWA school is also a refugee living and serving amongst their own communities. So it's so incredible, many of whom probably grew up in UNRWA schools themselves and then went on to teach in them. And then the UNRWA alumni that I meet in the United States, folks who either worked for, benefited from, or received an education from the agency, always sing the praises of the education that they had and the scholarships that they were given to be able to pursue further education, whether they became doctors or engineers. You know, we have people in the United States that are UNRWA graduates that went on to help put the helicopter on Mars with NASA. We have top-notch doctors, teachers. I think even one of the UNRWA teachers won Best Teacher of the Year a few years back. And I really implore people to look more into the UNRWA education system and to talk to folks about their experience, because I've heard the most incredible stories, and it's part of these beautiful memories that folks have. Despite going through trauma, becoming refugees, and living in camps, the schools seem to be this safe haven for folks who otherwise wouldn't have this opportunity. So we're so grateful for that. And I also love to brag that the World Bank rated the UNRWA schools as the best performing public schools in the Middle East, which is incredible, especially given how large the school system is and how many kids it serves. Like you mentioned, 500,000 girls and boys, with gender parity in the schools going back decades. I think it's just one of the most incredible programs. And I love visiting the UNRWA classrooms, and I look forward to having that opportunity again soon. So thank you for that reflection and that reminder. I think there's just a couple more questions I'd like to ask before we end our conversation today. The next thing I would love to know from your perspective as the Deputy Commissioner General is that how can we in America, from both our government, which you're meeting with while you're here in Washington, D.C., to our people, folks like myself, how can we better support your mission as the agency?
So the U.S. government returned as a partner to the agency last year, and the U.S. government support is crucial for the agencies. It enabled us to continue to deliver services across our 5 fields, so that's extremely important. And the U.S. is now our biggest institutional donor, providing support both to the education efforts, to the emergency interventions, and also through specific projects that enable us to deliver even better in all our programs. So huge appreciation for the government support to the agency. I think, we're facing quite often criticism because, there are, I would say, groups that would like to see the agency disappearing, that if we do not have UNRWA, we do not have a refugee problem. And I would like to say that, regardless of UNRWA or not, the Palestine refugees are there, and we are mandated to serve the Palestine refugees, to deliver services, and no one is better placed to do so than UNRWA. So I think, answering to your question, Layla, it's important, I think, to help us convey the stories about what we deliver and how important we are for the Palestinian refugees. I think sometimes the discussion becomes a bit blurred by all the criticism that we hear against the agency. We will always strive to deliver better, and we can always improve. But I think it's important to counter some of the criticism because it's unfounded and it's politically motivated. So I think with your help, we can increase the focus on the quality of our programs, the importance of what we deliver for the Palestinian refugees in all our fields. So I think what we can do is who are meeting the refugees every day, is to try to share their stories and to convey them. And maybe you can help us amplify those stories to the public here in the US, so they can understand the importance of what the agency is delivering, also in terms of stability to the region.
Thank you, Leni. So if you are a person listening to this broadcast, whether live or the rebroadcast, please come forward to us with your stories. If UNRWA touched your life in some way, we'll help you tell those stories. And I think it's so important for our fellow Americans to be aware of this aspect of your lives. So please know that we're here and we want to help you share that message and don't be shy. We really are so excited as well because next month in June, we'll be revealing something very exciting related to our alumni group. And so we want you to stick around and be part of that. Before we end our conversation today, I have one last question, Leni, and I would like to know lastly, if there's anything that you'd like to add or anything you'd like UNRWA USA supporters watching to know.
You've given me the opportunity to talk about the life of Palestinian refugees and how the agency is providing life-saving services and education to millions of Palestinian refugees every day. I think, for me, it's a huge concern that we're not able to meet all the needs and that we're facing a funding gap this year that may be even bigger due to the Ukraine crisis. I think we need to redouble our efforts together to make sure that we can continue to deliver the services to the Palestinian refugees. I think it's important that we communicate to the wider audience in the US and beyond the importance of continuing to uphold the rights of Palestinian refugees. We have to ensure that the Palestinians are not forgotten, that they're not left behind, and that in lack of a political solution, UNRWA is delivering government-like services to the Palestinian refugees. That has to continue. And we have to work together to make that happen. Because I do wake up every morning being concerned that we cannot pay the salaries to all our dedicated staff. I am concerned about the food situation in Gaza. I'm really concerned about the developments in Lebanon and how that will impact the Palestinian refugees living in the camps there. I am concerned about the most vulnerable among the Palestinian refugees in Jordan being impacted by the economic crisis due to COVID. And I am concerned about the women I meet in Syria who are not sure on how they can feed their children in the coming months. So with that, I would like to thank you. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for inviting me and letting me share my perspective on the organization. I would like to close with just repeating what I said earlier. This is an organization you should be proud to support. I am proud to serve. I'm proud of the team I'm working with, and I'm proud of all the teachers and doctors and nurses and sanitation workers that are on the ground every day in the 5 fields delivering services to the Palestinian refugees.
Thank you, Leni, for sharing your important work and expertise with us. It's an honor to have you as the Deputy Commissioner General and to have this opportunity to talk. And we really appreciate that you made time for us to educate and inform us about UNRWA's latest developments from multiple angles. We recognize all your hard work and effort to support Palestinian refugees. And I'd like to take a final moment to remind all those watching to please take action and support Palestinian refugees this month, the month of Ramadan. You can do so through donating to the link appearing at the bottom of the screen, unrwausa.org. Your donations are zakat eligible, they're tax deductible, and they will help UNRWA USA provide food assistance and orphan support to refugees in Gaza. Leni, thank you again. Thank you to all who have tuned in. We are confident that you will assist the people of Gaza the best you can this Ramadan and beyond, and that is especially through our supporters who we know will step up and provide financial support. Please make sure you're following UNRWA USA via our social media handles, and stay tuned for our upcoming news. Thank you again, and have a great week.